therapy work? And I mean from a real macro perspective. Does therapy work? Not just in what we do, but in general, does therapy work? Frankly, there's been decades of research about this question, right? We ask it before we enter grad school. Does therapy even really work? I think most of us have some buy-in because that's why we're here. But does it really even work? Well, this is interesting. A lot of people don't know this. 75 to 80%, so about a little bit more than 3/4 of people that enter therapy report good. About 3/4. I'm going to build this up a little bit. But how could it not work, right? I mean, gosh, I'm going to give you an example of just an amazing therapist. Ken, do you want to show us this one?
Does a former drill sergeant make a terrible therapist?
That's what makes me sad. That's interesting.
You know what makes me sad? You do! Maybe we can jug on over to Mamby-Pamby land where maybe we can find some self-confidence for you, you jackwagon!
How could therapy not work? I mean, it's good stuff, right? Some of you know therapists like that too, right? We actually try not to do that here at Calo. You plugging me back in? Okay. All right. So that's a little bit from the macro. We're slowly get into a little bit micro here at Calo. But what causes change then? So if therapy works, well, what works? So if you're a therapist, don't answer this question, okay? Non-therapist, take a stab at this. If you're not a therapist, what causes change? Therapy works, but what works? What's that? Relationships. Okay. Man, she's good, right, therapist? What about the therapist? What would you say? Say that again?
I'm not a therapist.
Okay. Person has to want to. Okay.
Have to feel safe.
Feel safe. Okay. What else?
Adaptation.
All right. So,
Patterns of behavior.
so any other therapists? Any other comments? So we have relationship over here. There's actually a lot of things that do account for change. So we have the client. These are all things that were peeled apart in some of the research. The client themselves having motivation and hope. The treatment method actually does matter a little bit. The therapist, maybe not Mr. Jackwagon, but the therapist dynamics do matter. The context of the therapy takes place. That actually does play a role in an impact. The relationship that's been mentioned, they all play a part. However, some factors do account for more change than others, and so we're going to get into that a little bit more. So here's a little bit more about the research. The APA, the American Psychological Association, they sponsored a joint task force where they said, you know what, let's actually really figure this out. Everybody thinks therapy works, but let's really figure this out. What really works? So what they did is they had this 20 original meta-analyses, and they said, you know what, let's really peel this apart. Does therapy and the relationship, what are the elements that really create effectiveness? And so we have the results. It's pretty exciting. One of the key people behind this is somebody named John Norcross, if you want to read more about him. But this is really validated and important research for all of us as we work in programs, or we work in therapy, or as we do consulting. What really makes a difference? So here's some of the highlights. I'm going to tell you more about these, but here's some of the take-homes. What did we learn from this research? Well, the therapy relationship makes substantial contributions to successful treatment. It's more important than medications in most cases, which some of you probably aren't surprised about. But another really important factor is, and this is part of the relationship, is empathy. Is if you do one thing well, John Norcross said this really well, he says if you do one thing well, do empathy well. Do that really well. It produces the highest outcomes in therapy. Very important to remember that. Alliance. We're going to talk a lot about alliance today. Alliance is critical. It's really regardless of the presenting issue of the treatment modality. The therapist, and at Calo and in attachment work, the parents, the caregivers, aligning with the child or the client is very important. The research says that alliance accounts for about 60% of the change within the relationship. So as therapists, 90% of therapists now can say that relationships are the most important factor. But most people don't know, well, what is it about the relationship? This is a huge piece about the relationship that matters. It's alliance. Here's a dog being the therapist, because here at Calo, our dogs are really good therapists. And here's a man laying on the couch doing therapy, and the dog says, "Well, I think you're wonderful," and the client is crying a little bit. The alliance is super important for us here. And then the other thing that was really a big take-home is that repairing the alliance. This one's not really talked about very much, but repairing the therapeutic alliance is super important. Mild, severe, moderate breaks, it's very essential to good outcomes. So we'll dive into these a little bit more. Relationships. So the therapist-client relationship, in a summary, is a crucial, fundamental causation of success. Not just a correlation, but a causation of success. 90% of therapists can now say this. 10 to 15 years ago, a lot of therapists didn't really know. It just works. I think we're in a much advanced age now where we can say, no, it's the relationship, but what pieces of the relationship we have to figure out. In attachment work, of course, the parent and the caregiver. So what was happening in the video with Dan and the therapist? Did that therapist just become a spectator and eat popcorn? No. I mean, it was heavily involved. And, of course, that child has to feel super safe, right? They're doing co-therapy together. And then if the parent was there, like Dan says, that parent would be doing that. We have to align with them as well. Focusing, this is really important, focusing on evidence-based practices without the relationship, this is now backed up in research, is very problematic. In other words, if you just focus on this worksheet, or if you just do this certain model, it will create change. It actually doesn't if there's not a relationship component to it. We have to have the relationship be a part of the treatment. And we need an environment where the relationship can thrive. There's always going to be new sexy models out there about, hey, let's treat it this way, let's do it this way. But they always have to have the relationship at a core piece of your treatment. Going along with that, I mean, one of the real things that drove me to Calo, when Ken and I were working together about 7 years ago, I had a student as a therapist, 9 years old, adopted from Brazil, and we were able to do a lot of work in my office, but the program and the structure was not really free enough to be able to help him adequately because there were some subtle levels and points, and it wasn't actually addressing his core foundation. He would get frustrated as he would leave because there was these patterns that were not allowing him to feel safe. So it's really important that the relationship can really be the change agent, be free, and not have all these other obligations and limitations to it. And this one's really important. It is a relationship, but who needs... the therapist does need to do a lead, follow, lead approach. So the therapist does need to make sure that they know where they're going, not just kind of in present, but that there's direction. So therapists have to be really sensitive. You know what? Is an afternoon session better than a morning session for this client? Do I need to do a session in the milieu versus just in my office? Do I need to play a game instead of just talk because they get so dysregulated and distracted? It sounds so simple to say this, but what do a lot of therapists drift to? Convenience. And so you have to really fight that drift to make sure that you're really tailoring the therapy to the client. Empathy then. I mentioned this, but I want to say it again. If you do one thing well, do empathy. It's a huge factor in change. Most of you know this, but therapists need to understand client experiences. That is so important. That's been modeled by Dan. He's talked a lot about this. Demonstrate understanding through your response. Effective therapists don't just parrot words. When you're learning empathy, you think, I just keep parroting the words and I say it back, and this is what I do. But no, there's intentionality behind it. And you don't just reaffirm. And then empathic responses may be straightforward responses. So it might be some of this reflectiveness that the client is sharing that convey understanding of what they're meaning and what they're feeling. It needs to validate the client's perspective. So looking for some candles. And what's really validating to a dog? What smells good? A dog's behind smells good to the dog. So aroma candles for a dog is really important, but for you and I, it's like, that's disgusting. But you actually need to validate what's important to them, right? They're normal. In evocative language, you know how Dan talked about being whiny, or you might even have to throw, you'd rather have, say it again, commission versus omission. You sometimes have to throw some things out there. Most of the time, our students will rein you in if you're wrong. It's okay. You can take some of the risk because they'll rein you in. But this evocative language to bring the client's experience to life is really a key part of empathy, as the research indicates. Empathy also is aimed at what is implicit but not yet expressed. So there's these subtleties with that little girl. What were some of them that maybe weren't expressed in words that you could see from the video? What she was feeling or experiencing. She said, my mom abused me, or these other things. But what were some of the nonverbals that she was communicating that you actually maybe felt some empathy for as you were watching that?
Sat up one. After she had kind
Good.
of she wanted to be noticed rather than so on.
Good. She wanted to be noticed. Good. Good. Anything else?
I know as soon as it started getting hard, she kind of hid in the therapist. She hid her.
Yeah.
She died right under her armpit.
Yes. Good. Good. Any observations? So the empathy then can be really aimed at those things. Like, why? This is really implicit, but it's not being expressed. But let me actually express some empathy for that. And then sometimes empathy can be a nonverbal communication or a gesture. Let me show you a video about this. But most of the time we think empathy just needs to be through words or through expression. But actually you can have empathy without words. Right? No words exchanged. But was there empathy? Yeah, there was empathy, right? What did the man pick up on as the cue? Did you see that? It happened fast. Yeah. Yeah, there's that looks really good, but I can't enjoy that. And then he allowed it to happen. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about alliance, because we talked about that being 60% then of the relationship change. It's really a partnership and mutual collaboration with the client. Well, duh, that makes a lot of sense, but here's what Borden said. He says, really built upon three things. A positive emotional bond, usually within the first 3 to 5 sessions. You have this real quick bond. That you have shared interests, there's a liking, and then there's the ability to agree on the goals. So it's not just that you've established a relationship and you can communicate, but you actually also agree on where the therapy should go. And then as things start to get rough, the alliance also is important because there needs to be a consensus on the tasks involved. When the therapist starts to challenge, there has to be an alliance, right? Because what happens if there's no alliance? Well, that's when you get the resistance. So it's really important that you have these three things, and the therapist has to own this. Has to completely own these three things. Making sure that the relationship is going well, that there's a bond, that you're spending enough time, you're attending to it, you're talking about shoes, whatever you got to do, and that you're agreeing on goals, that you know where you're going. But then when it comes time to challenge or to be curious or to really wonder, that there's a mutual consensus on that, if there's homework involved or different things. And then it's also on the therapist to bridge the client's needs into a therapeutic plan. So there might be these special circumstances, dynamics to the relationship that you have to kind of find a way to say, okay, I need to align, but I need to make sure that I'm the one owning all this and putting it into a plan. This is really important too, that a lot of therapists, this is what the research indicated, a lot of therapists fall short because they believe that alliance is an early part of the treatment only. It's just something we do at the beginning, we form a relationship, and then we're good to go. But it has to be a recurrent task that you're always checking in, you're always working on it. It's central to the work. You never stop working on the alliance. Okay, so if it accounts for 60% of the change, then it's very critical. It's one of the strongest validated factors influencing therapy. Just having this relationship of trust, that we're aligned, we know where we're going, we're working on the same page. And then active therapist monitoring of the alliance is very important too. So, and it's not just, like I said, most of the time within 3 to 5 sessions, the beginning alliance is formed. But you have to always go back and check into it. And then maintenance and assessments of the alliance. This was another hole that a lot of therapists were falling into. That if they weren't checking on it, they weren't checking into the alliance, they were getting a lot of dropouts. But there wasn't a lot of communication about why the clients were dropping out. And it's really a predictor of successful outcomes as well. Therapists who have better alliance have better outcomes. One, because they stay in treatment, but also because they're better engaged. And then a lot of therapists also were making this mistake, that they were waiting for the client to express frustration, express disappointment. If it wasn't feeling strong, they were waiting for the client to check in about that. But the therapist has to drive this piece, that they have to check in with the client. They have to say, how are you doing? How are things? And even better is to make sure that you're attuned enough where you know that the alliance isn't really strong, that you can actually read it and you can tell that there's been a break or there's been a disruption. The client's perception of the alliance is much more powerful than the therapist. All right, and then this was another huge piece, the connection break repair. Many of you have seen this tattooed on our wall out here. It's such an integral part that we do, and so this was really grabbing my attention as I read this. But connection break repair experiences are positively related to success. Sometimes connection break repair scare people. There's a break. This is bad. No, actually, the repairing the relationship is really important. Here's another one with a dog walking away from its master, and the dog is saying, always good dog, never great dog. There's a break. They need to repair that. They need to work on that, right? And that's okay. That's actually a good thing. You think about your best relationships, you actually have breaks. You just have repair. And therefore, a lot of times, your relationships are even better than they were before. But if it's just superficial and you're always just trying to be connected, it's not always very deep and meaningful. Breaks are okay, but they have to have repair. Like I said, most relationships have this. So here's an example of female dog walking out of the house. She's got her bags packed. She's leaving him. And she says, one more thing, Cody. You know all those times I wagged my tail? Well, I faked it. So they are in a break, right? They're in a break. But it's pretty normal. You have breaks in good relationships. But here's what's really important, too. That clients usually sit on the problem. So if you've said something that's bothered them, it's impacted them, doesn't sit well with them, they're not coming out with it most of the time. They're sitting on the issue. So what do most therapists fall into the trap of? Oh, everything's okay then. But what was interesting is when therapists would check in on it, would assume that maybe there needs to be some work and repair, the client was agreeable that there has been a break. And that was really encouraging, actually. They weren't just so amiable that they couldn't agree. Most clients did agree. Yeah, actually, when you said that, it did hurt my feelings, or this wasn't okay. So the therapist constantly checking in on that and repairing that was very important. And because you have better outcomes, too. The therapist response is essential. I hope you heard the last 5 to 10 minutes of the example that Dan was giving. But many therapists, when they're getting resistance or, this teenager challenging him and calling him these swear words and, going back, you can be this whiny playfulness back. But it's not just that you're a punching bag, but you do need to be receptive and open that maybe you did do something wrong that could have impacted the break. And just being non-defensive and open to that was really an important characteristic for good alliances. What do most therapists do? They chalk up the defiance to another DSM diagnosis. It's really hard to take the feedback, so you start to group the behavior with another diagnosis, and that's really destructive. It's more important to say, boy, maybe I am. Maybe I'm actually contributing to the problem here. Being really non-defensive and receptive to that really strengthens the alliance. Because that's a big change from saying, boy, that must really feel bad to come in here and have me misunderstand you. That feels a lot better than, oh, in my mind, I'm just talking you up to borderline or something like that. Right? And then when clients need to feel really safe in the relationship to express the feelings. If you haven't created that, then we've actually failed, because we have to let our clients feel safe to express their feelings. But therapists, again, it's not that they become a punching bag. That's an easy read into it. Well, I just got to be non-defensive and just take it all. I really like what Dan said, that you actually can banter back in a playful way to kind of challenge it. Well, maybe all 16-year-olds do this, and you can do that, and that's okay. But if you are calling them jackwagon and other things like that, that's when you start to run into problems. Okay. All right, one more video. This is where I need the sound. You got it? How many of you remember Friends, the show Friends? Okay, Joey and Ross are about to, well, they actually have a break. Just really pay attention to some of the ways that Joey wants to repair the relationship, and how extreme he'll go to try to repair this, okay? Little spoiler, I guess.
Hey. Ross, I know you're pissed at me, but we have to talk about this.
Actually, we don't.
You ready?
Fine, okay, fine. But I gotta say, technically,
wrap it up,
I
but then
didn't
I'm
even do
done.
anything wrong.
I'll wrap it up.
You didn't do anything wrong?
I said I didn't technically.
Let's put aside the fact that you accidentally picked up my grandmother's ring and you accidentally proposed to Rachel.
But can I just stop you right there for a second? When people do this, you're saying?
And I can even understand that you couldn't tell Rachel. But why couldn't you tell me? Huh? You had all day to, and you didn't.
I know, I should have. I'm sorry.
Not using it right, Joe. I'm gonna go.
Oh, come on, look, Ross, we have to get past this.
Give me the bag.
No, look, I don't know what else to do. I said I'm sorry.
Joey.
Now you should scream at me or curse me or hit me.
I'm not gonna hit you.
Why not? You'll feel better. I'll feel better. And you know you want to. I can see it in your eyes.
No, I don't.
A little bit.
No.
A little bit.
No.
A little bit more.
Give me the bag. Joey, give me the bag.
Hit me.
Joe, I'm not
Hit
kidding.
me. No, hit me, hit me, hit me, hit me. I'm sorry, it was a reflex. God, this really hurt. I couldn't help it. When a fist comes at your face, you duck. Look.
What do we talk about this on the way to the hospital?
Good. Yeah, maybe while we're there, they can check your reflexes.
There, you can just say this. Yeah, but I got one. Safe to say that was a repair fail. Maybe didn't go so good. So do these other things instead, okay? Don't be like Joey, where you're just going so far that it actually makes matters worse. Okay.